Bootcamp's class on advanced dialogue techniques. My name's Conor, and I'm going to be running this class today. I'm a little under the weather, I'm a little unfocused and drowsy. I think maybe recovering from being sick, so hopefully we'll stay on my A game as much as I can. Let's review just where we are. We're in a stage channel, so this is a channel where you have to request to speak on Discord by clicking that small hand icon that will raise your hand. Then if you're invited to the stage, you'll have to click accept invitation to speak, which is this green bar that should show up at the top of your screen. You might have to turn your device to the side to see it if you are on a tablet. So we have a new session of our 8-week feature bootcamp starting Friday, June 9th. That's going to be Fridays from 6 to 8 Pacific time. We're going to have new fiction writing classes coming up on our novel writing server called WordCamp really soon, too. And a new bootcamp will be starting in I think like early to mid-June. So watch for announcements on that. That will take you from idea to finished draft of a book in 12 weeks. So here's just a bit about me. I think most people here know me already, but my name's Conor. I teach the bootcamps and the weekly Writers Lab. And I have been writing full-length scripts for about 11, 12 years now. And I really started with plays, though, which are much more dialogue-driven than features are. You can write it like an entire play doing nothing but really writing lines. And then maybe really, really kind of minimal stage direction. And so I come from a theater background and have always been really interested in dialogue techniques and how people render these things on the page in such a way that the actors can replicate that dialogue on screen or again and again, night after night in a stage play. Here's the new dates for our bootcamp. So Pilot Bootcamp's 6-week course will take you from idea to finished draft of a pilot. That's going to be Sundays at 10 a.m. to noon Pacific time. That's starting in July. Novel Bootcamp starts June 24th, and we have Feature Bootcamp starting June 9th, Fridays 6 to 8. Okay, so you can donate, become a supporting member, and get access to all our boot camps and labs from just $29 a month with the yearly discount. That gives you access to every single event, workshop, class, boot camp, everything on all our servers, including WordCamp for novel writing, Toon Camp for animation, Film Camp for filmmaking, Code Camp for computer coding, programming. You can volunteer if you know a skill or language you'd like to teach. You can sign up using our form, and you can refer a friend. You'll both get a free month of Unlimited and a free month of Arc Studio. Okay, so here's just an overview of the class today. This doesn't even include everything because there's so many slides in this one. We'll actually share the slides with you so you can review them later if you want to on your own. But we're basically going to be looking at different types of dialogue, what makes movie dialogue really work, and what makes it sort of specific and special and different from both real-life speech and speech in plays and books and things like that. We can look at stylization and maybe creating a specific lexicon to help in your world building and to just manufacture that sense of specificity to your world. We will talk about parentheticals, intention and tactics, and sort of scene work things that really play into dialogue or elements of drama that are played out with dialogue to express character, subtext, and relationships. We'll also have some volunteer sections where we will be doing some readings, watching some videos, and also be doing some mini little writing exercises. So, plenty to do today. Thank you for being here with us. Let's keep going through this. So, I'm not going to start with this discussion question because I don't like it. I'm going to just just dive right into the kind of overview of dialogue stuff. So, what is this chart about bank robbers and DJs? I actually have no idea what that slide is. Let's start with what is dialogue. So this is just the words that your characters say and the manner in which they say them. It's going to be doing a couple things. One, characters don't know that they are in a story. Your characters are fake people that live in stories, but they don't know that. So what they're doing is trying to simply meet their needs and go about their lives and live like fake people do. And because as a result of that, they're going to need to speak to express themselves and be heard. And why do people say things? Well, usually in a certain roundabout way, it's to get something that they want. So usually characters are going to be pursuing goals and tackling their objectives using dialogue and picking different tactics in their interactions with other people in order to sort of manipulate them into getting what they want, whether that manipulation is through tricking someone, or maybe their intention is to kind of flatter them or threaten them. There's a lot of different sort of just ways that you can use words to get things that you want. So dialogue is going to advance your character's goals, so it's going to move them down a track towards their different objectives, and we can sort of ideally have these markers of progress in these objectives so we can tell that your character is moving along in their story. dialogue might, your characters, the way that they address each other might change as the story goes on to sort of reflect development of their relationship. And, if we start calling each other Mr. and Mrs. this, and then by the end we're calling each other by nicknames, then you can see that clearly in that dialogue we have expressed how these characters have moved forward in their arc. Or, your characters just obviously will say things to each other at certain times that they would not have said earlier on, indicating that we are making progress in their journeys. Dialogue is going to reveal character and tell us who these people are, not only in what they're saying, but also the way that they say it. It's going to impart information, so it's going to this word exposition sounds like it's used as a kind of a bad thing, that we don't want to have too much exposition in the script. But there's certain stuff that we just do, in fact, need to hear and learn about your story world, and dialogue is a good way to convey that. And then last we have it entertains. So it's funny, it's well crafted, we're using unusual turns of phrase that feel like they could actually have been spoken aloud by this fictional person in this fictional context, and don't feel like they take us out of the story world. They make us laugh, they make us lean in, they make us hang on every word. They're just entertaining. We've heard lots and lots of dialogue in your life, and you've heard or spoken millions of real conversations, and that's why writing movie and TV dialogue, usually the tricky part is going to be more like taking out everything that doesn't belong in a movie or show. So it's not exactly just like writing out how real people would really talk. You have to be a little more kind of clever than that. You have to get kind of to the point quicker than real people do. If you compare like a conversation in a really well-written TV show, it's almost nothing like a real life conversation sometimes. You watch one of these really sharp dramas where a character comes in a room, they sort of like have a brief repartee with somebody else, which ends with them expressing exactly what they want and exactly what has changed in their relationship. Then they leave the room. And in real life, people kind of like dance around the point. We sort of forget stuff. We trail off, or we maybe change tactics halfway through, or we lose interest in things, or conversations in real life are just nowhere near as kind of precise and manufactured as fictional conversations are, which I think we all know this already. But that means that we have to sort of, in writing really good fictional language, we need to take out those things that sort of just detract from the experience of the scene. They feel irrelevant, or they feel like they are dragging the read down, or it feels maybe like we're trying too hard to express every little and of a person's stutter and speech, when we sort of just need to use these lines of dialogue to quickly get us to the dramatic point of that scene, and then kind of get out as early as we can, which is just not a skill that most people have in communicating in real life. So do keep in mind that writing this dialogue, it's like we're not trying to perfectly capture the essence of exactly how people speak or the ways that people really, really do interact, unless you're doing some sort of really like kind of experimental film style or something like that. We always have these other objectives, these other things that need to be, these other tracks of progress that we need to be making. These your characters always moving towards a clear and tangible goal that they recognize and are putting in plans in an effort to accomplish. And just in general, people in shows and movies are a little bit more kind of focused in their conversations than we are in real life. Digressions and people going off on tangents and stuff like that, there's places for it, and it can sometimes fit into the world of your story, but usually we're trying to cut things out that just don't belong, that aren't doing any of our objectives here. If a line of dialogue doesn't reveal character, impart information, entertain, and move the story forward, ideally all four of those things at once, then we need to kind of evaluate, well, can it do one of those things better, or should I just cut it out? And also, when you're doing fictional conversations, a lot of the time we can take away the sort of beginnings and the endings of those conversations, because like you have the ability to cut into a conversation whenever you need. We never really need to see them pull up in their car and lock the door and knock on the front door and come inside and say, hi, how are you, and take their coat off and then settle down for that conversation. We don't really need to see every step of that usually. We can kind of cut to the middle, like to just before the most important parts if you need to. So make sure to take advantage of that. We don't want to be dragged through every sort of arduous step of the conversation. And then at the end of it, we don't want to stay too long for the goodbyes and the people rehashing what just happened, even though in real life we kind of do this. Like in real life, people sort of rehash the same topics all the time. And kind of debate things ad nauseum, but we sort of need to imagine that stuff is happening in between the scenes in a movie or TV show to make sure that we're only seeing the important stuff and we're only seeing it once. If people keep having the same conversations again and again, it's just going to start to grate on your reader, and it will feel like we've done this. We need to cover more important territory. We need to be cutting to the interesting parts. So, let's look at what is bad dialogue to begin with. We might hear just some of these notes, and let's kind of decode what these notes mean. So stagnant, static, or stagey. This note is typically going to mean something feels a little bit too much like a stage play, in the sense that your characters are simply not receiving enough interesting information or direction as to what to be doing in the scene. So if in imagining that scene, although you, the writer, might be envisioning them doing all kinds of stuff, like this you're just like, well, that's what the actors are doing, but in my mind I sort of see what they're doing. You may not be communicating the moment to moment of that conversation well enough, the stuff like sort of in between the words. And in some of our examples today, we'll look at just what some of that really good in between the lines of dialogue writing looks like in a conversation sequence. In any case, try to avoid having your characters just be standing around talking for the majority of the story, unless it's like a courtroom drama or something like that, where they have like a really good reason to be doing nothing but standing around and talking. Looks like we have a question in the chat from Joya. Go ahead, Joya. Your microphone is muted, just so you know. You'll need to click the gray microphone icon.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so 2 questions. One, you were talking a little earlier about like not repeating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it automatically made me think like The Office, where where they have the what do you call it? The stapler in the Jello.
Mm-hmm.
Like they keep bringing that back. Like, so how do you like not do that? Or why do they do that? And then it's because they always come back with the Jello inside the stapler inside the Jello.
You mean just the characters referencing something in a joke that has happened before in the episode, like it's kind of a running gag?
Oh, okay. So that's something
Is that what you're asking
totally
about?
different.
Right?
Yeah, yeah. They always have this always have this stapler in a big thing of Jello. Not always, but it comes back here and there, and it's like, oh my God. So yeah.
Is that dialogue, or are you talking about just a prank that the characters are pulling? I remember that happens in the pilot.
Oh, you're right. Okay, yeah, that's not dialogue. Okay.
That's okay,
Yeah.
but maybe we can talk about some times where you would have the characters repeat a conversation or reference the same point again and again throughout an episode. We can just talk about that if you want. So yeah, there are certain times where we call this a running gag or a running joke most of the time, where we continue to reference one event that has happened in the past before, or maybe the consequences of that event keep coming back up, or like we keep being reminded of it somehow. It usually works in comedy quite well. If it's something that kind of surprised us before and made us laugh before, and maybe watching it continue to recur throughout the episode is just amusing in some way, or it has like it's a nice surprise to see it again. Arrested Development is full of humor like this, where there will be, something that happens in one episode, then 9 episodes later it comes back, and we have the characters discuss that event again or something like that. So I would say mostly for comedic effect. If you can make us laugh with it, then it works. But there's going to be even a point of that where the audience will start to get sick of the same joke. Family Guy, I think, is the show that sometimes plays the same joke again and again and again until the point where it's not funny. Then it becomes funny again. Then it becomes unfunny again. So there is a line, certainly, to not be cross. But yeah, a running gag or running joke is definitely a good way to kind of like call back to something that you set up earlier. Just try not to hit it try not, maybe like 3 times per story is going to usually be about the max where people will start to get annoyed with it.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. And also, this stuff, with this stuff, could you also apply it to like novel writing, or this works mainly just the whole dynamics of dialogue that you're teaching us work only for TV writing or for film or TV?
There are some similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. I've got a couple slides on the specific differences between novel play and movie or TV dialogue.
Okay. Gotcha.
Thank you for the
All right.
questions.
Thank-
All right. Yes, good question. So we will get to those in just a few slides. Let's talk more about bad dialogue first. So, stagnant, static, or stagey. This is not as big a deal in books, for instance. Like, this is mostly something that's going to come up in movies, and the audience's imagination can do a lot of heavy lifting in books. But even in a book, you can still have your characters be doing stuff in scenes. It shouldn't just be dialogue. But in any case, you're really going to feel the effect of this in a TV show or movie where it's just like a whole page of nothing but just line after line after line. We don't get any sense of the characters' moods changing or tactics changing or circumstances in the room changing, or maybe you didn't put them in an interesting enough place to be having that conversation. Anytime you have a whole page of nothing but dialogue, make really, really sure that there's nothing else that you can insert that will improve that. Like, you see that more commonly in TV than in features. Typically, you have to be kind of letting us know, how is this conversation impacting the character? How is it sort of changing their mood moving forward? And how is it, maybe we can see them formulating a new plan, or we can see them sort of be shocked by something they hear. We want to be updated on what their reactions are, not just see the words themselves. So in movies and TV, make sure that you're leaving space for these beats of action where we can track the effect of the conversation on the characters. Don't just write out the lines. What are some other problems? Too much filler, hi, how are you, or undramatic speech, which would be characters talking about stuff that's not related to the plot, not related to their goal in the scene, and it might just kind of be talking about something random that they're interested in, or some kind of tangent. I think we see sometimes this works, or has a dramatic effect, like in Quentin Tarantino movies, for instance, we see a lot of stuff like this, and there's always, in my view, at least, there's almost always a really good reason for why we're watching those characters talk about something else. Like when we first meet these hitmen in the car, Jules and Vincent, we don't know exactly what these criminals are about to go do. We just see that they are really good friends, and we get to see that they're really funny. They have a lot of shared history together, and they're really close with each other. They share a lot of sort of personal anecdotes about their travels and lives, and we get the idea of their bond really being conveyed to us. So we are revealing character. We're sort of learning the backstory of these characters and what their dynamic is like. And also, it contrasts very sharply to what they're about to go do. So we see the sort of two halves of them. One in their opening conversation about cheeseburgers in different countries. They go right from that to shooting someone, which kind of tells us how normal this is for them. Like, the fact that they are talking about such unrelated stuff reveals a great deal about them, because most people who are going to go commit a murder would not be talking about cheeseburgers in different countries. So I hope that clarifies how you can use these sort of tangents and, quote, non-related dialogue in order to actually be accomplishing our main goals, which are revealing character, advancing characters towards their goals, and, teaching us things about the world. What else? Bad dialogue, murky or negligible conflict, and is not building to anything apparent or interesting, and just doesn't kind of reach a clear objective. Your character doesn't always have to explicitly state their objective, but it should be pretty clear to us what your main character is up to and what they're trying to do, and why. Within the first few scenes, at least. If we're trying to deliberately reveal your character's intentions or motivations, then you should do that with a lot of kind of careful, with a very light touch, I would say. A lot of the time, we like to know what the main character is doing and why, so try not to be too murky, or to try not to take way too long to get to some kind of objective, or a character moving along that track towards reaching a goal of theirs. We have another question or comment from Meep. Go ahead, Meep.
So dialogue should not only just be a tool for showcasing personality of a character, but could also be used as a measure of, like, I guess, explaining how a character responds to a specific situation?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's kind of comes down to, or that's one of the great things that it can reveal about a character, is how, like, if they are in some, like, it tells us their comfort level with the situation. If they can have very, in Marvel movies, the characters will be having very kind of quippy, casual conversations in the middle of gunfights. What does that tell us about them?
That it's just, it's kind of the norm for them, or that's just like...
Exactly, it's the norm for them. They do this all the time. They, it's not even scary for them. They're not particularly worried, and we don't really feel that worried for them in those cases. It kind of sets a lighter tone for the entire thing. So you can, but the way the characters talk and the things they talk about, and how they react to what's going on, we can learn a great deal about them. And you can use the dialogue to sort of show us what's going on in the characters' heads.
Okay. I know we haven't, like, kind of gotten to it with the on the nose
Mhm.
dialogue there, but if a character is like kind of giving like a speech or what have you, or like is kind of deliberately trying to say something that is meant to be pretty obvious, not necessarily to the audience, but to the character that they
Mhm.
would be speaking to, would that be an instance where on the nose dialogue would be like acceptable?
I think so. Yeah. And yeah, it's just because I guess we have this note that dialogue is on the nose. We consider this to be a bad thing usually, but sometimes people just do say what they mean. Sometimes characters do just speak from the heart, and they just kind of articulate exactly what they want. And that's not always bad. There are times when it just makes total sense for a character to be very sincere, or to make a, like you're thinking like a motivational speech or something like that, where they're hyping everyone
Yeah.
up, and we're just saying what we already know. The enemy's out there, and we got to go fight them, right?
Yeah.
Well, in that case, I would look at the emotional technique that they're using. So what specific emotional appeal are they making in that dialogue? If they're just saying, "Hey, the enemy's out there and we're in here. We have swords, but so do they. If we fight them, we might win. Let's go get them." Like that's not really an emotional appeal, right? You have to kind of, if you want to actually make that on the nose dialogue feel more
Yeah,
specific and real, and
I could
just
see that being something like in a sequence where like you have a couple people in a room and they don't know what they're doing, and they're trying to come up with a plan, and they're like, well, the enemy's out there,
uh,
we're in here, they have swords, but so do we. And then
yeah.
that kind of is like the sparking of a plan, I guess.
Okay, yeah. I mean, in that case, that might be kind of funny. We're sort of playing it for a laugh in that version of it, at least to me. That sounds like it could be in what's that show called? The Pirate Taika Waititi pirate show. Our flag means death. Sounds like it could be
Yeah.
something like that. So yeah, no, there are instances where your characters can just say exactly what's happening or exactly what they mean. But then I guess I would always just be looking at there's multiple ways to say exactly what you mean, right? So you have to sometimes take a specific tactic and employ a sort of emotional strategy in order to get what you want. And like we're doing a battlefield speech. Your character could, in giving their speech, they could choose their area of focus, their angle of approach, right? So on the nose dialogue can still be carefully done, because your character might appeal to their sense of duty and patriotism, or they might be talking to their men and they might say, this is our last chance for glory, and this is our chance for a big victory and to make something of ourselves. Like they can state the obvious in many different ways. So on the nose dialogue should still be employed with the same care that we would use writing, any dialogue. But characters do just say the obvious sometimes. Yes.
Okay. And had a thought, then I lost it. But that's fine. I guess I can come back to it later.
That's okay. I actually, in terms of characters just saying the obvious, I sort of really liked an example of this I saw recently in is it like 1985 crime drama called Witness with Harrison Ford. We're sort of doing an arc with the main character and the lady that he ends up, staying at her house as he's trying to solve this murder case. He ends up having to stay on their farm and stuff. They end up having that kind of main character and love interest fall in love kind of arc. And then at the end, they're about to leave, and he doesn't say "I love you." He just says, "You know how I feel," which is kind of perfect, right? Like he is saying the obvious, but there's lots of interesting ways to say the obvious.
Oh, you know what? I think I did just remember what I wanted to say, and it was real quick. So if you're writing a script for the intention for somebody to kind of um, like I guess read it and maybe consider whether or not it's something they would want to like take advantage of or potentially like um buy off of you, should you be thinking about that when you're writing your dialogue in a way, or like when you're writing when you're writing your dialogue, like, hey, is this easy for someone to understand? Should we be thinking about it in terms of how someone's going to read it or how it's being played out in the story?
That's a good question. So if you're giving your script to anyone to read, then you have to consider all of these things. Yeah, for sure. How it's going to sound when it's read out loud. I mean, we're giving someone a document that we're trying to get them to create the movie in their mind as they're reading it. So we're trying to, as best we can, convey the experience of watching the movie on the page. No matter who would read it, if it's a director, if it's a producer, if it's an actor who'd want to be in it. But actors are going to be the ones that really care about that. And so, like, ideally your script would be going to actors, right? So like at a certain point, we have to imagine that this will be read out loud, and that's why when you're writing your script, I would recommend trying to read some of the dialogue out, or maybe doing a reading once you have a draft all together and just hearing how it all sounds and making sure that it kind of makes sense and works. It's not always going to sound perfect because it's everyone's first time reading it, but it might allow you to kind of iron out some of those kinks, because we always have to imagine that it is intended to be read out loud.
Okay. Yeah, that was something I was kind of thinking about, but I think that's it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the good questions. Looks like we have a question from Carmen. Carmen, I've invited you to speak, so feel free to click the accept invitation button if you can. Or you can just leave your question or comment in the text. I think she's typing. So I'm going to continue with the slide, but I will be checking back in just a moment with you. She says I'm switching to my laptop. Okay, that's fine. Just let me know when you are ready. All right, so let's finish up with bad dialogue. On the nose means, we were just talking about this a lot, it means your characters are just stating exactly the obvious, or it's basically they don't even need to say it because it's so clear to us already. There's a lack of subtext. And it's okay to have some characters that are like this. This is just how some people are. Some people are very honest and speak from the heart. But not very many of us. And it's kind of a very unusual trait. I wouldn't think that this should be the defining trait of all of your characters. We also have this problem of characters that can sound too similar to each other, or they all sort of speak in the same voice. That can be an issue too. Or characters that sound like they're from totally different movies. If you have a period piece and you have one character that talks as if he's a modern day New Yorker, and this is supposed to be like Lord of the Rings, then it might kind of throw the whole thing off and kind of confuse the audience as to what the tone is. And last, we just have lines that are not entertaining and not memorable. If you finish a movie and you don't remember a single line from it, it's possible that the dialogue was not really standing out to you in some way, or that it was just not incredibly gripping, and this is considered a knock against the movie. So how to improve? We have lots of ways of practicing this. Looks like we have Carmen on stage. Carmen, do you have a question you want to ask?
I don't really have a question, but I was just remembering Natural Born Killers from when we read a portion of it in I think it was the horror class.
Mm-hmm.
And, I never really considered that like a horror film, but I guess it is. Because it's not really supernatural stuff. So to me, it just never really was that scary. But I guess it is, like pretty damn scary.
It's scary. I consider it sort of an experimental crime drama, but it's disturbing, certainly.
It's very, very, very disturbing. There's a really, really super long scene that takes place in the jail when they've already been arrested. And I think they were put like in different holding tanks or something. Anyways, I just thought it was so brilliant because there's a lot of dialogue, and the character that Woody Harrelson plays is going on and on and on. And you're not quite sure why this is going on and on. But then when you really look at it, from reading it, I think I was able to really understand how brilliantly, I think it was Quentin Tarantino that wrote this screenplay.
Mm-hmm.
And how he used the dialogue to show how this character is so manipulative and able to really take control of that situation so that he could take that Mossberg, and use it against them and take over the whole thing and break out. I think that's what actually ended up happening. It was just so brilliantly done because it was, it didn't sound like there was any purpose to it. It was, him joking around, making crude jokes, and then he starts to tell the story about the first time he picked up a Mossberg and how it felt in his hand. And it became very clear that he's telling them exactly what he's going to do. And it's almost like he's, talking it out with himself, but saying it out loud. In order to keep them first, he put them into a type of a state of relaxation, because he had them all laughing, and just loving the jokes, and then they ended up ordering food and everything. I don't know if you remember that. And then he just tells them what he's going to do, and then he does it. It's just so amazing. I think that's like the best dialogue I've ever read in my life.
Yeah, the script is quite different from the movie. If you watch them in comparison, I think there are some scenes that are totally different. But in any case, Tarantino is really good at this idea of we have some sort of point of tension, like something bad's going to happen, but the characters are just having a somewhat normal conversation, and he really draws out the tension and really builds it up as we're waiting for that bad thing to happen. And that's kind of using that Hitchcock principle of you show the bomb under the table, which in this case, in that movie, it's we know the main character is a serial killer psychopath, right? We know he's going to do something, we just don't know what yet exactly. And then you're going to use that conversation and really like build the tension, like extend that interaction out longer than you would think. And all the time we're building up to that surprise of what are they really going to do, or when's the bomb going to go off.
Yeah, so that's all I have to say.
Sure, thanks for sharing. That's a good technique. Okay, finishing. Oh, where do we go? Finishing with this. Okay, how to improve. So we can record and write out conversations, then sort of adjust them to make them more dramatic and interesting. So we may have to cut out a lot of the sort of ums and uhs and pauses and digressions and things like that. You can try improv or role-playing games like D&D, which is really handy, especially if you're running the games. Then you can try out lots of different characters. You can try out speaking in different voices, vocabularies, and syntaxes. You can try transcribing dialogue from other media, like books, into script format and see how it looks, see if there's any adjustments that you would make, or just, you can modify it as you see fit. You can break down dialogue from each character's perspective in a scene. So try, when you go through your next script that you're reading, maybe mark out, okay, at the start of the scene, this is the main character, this is what's in their way, this is the tactic that they're using to try to sort of win from the other character. Consider the intention behind each line. When actors are marking up a script in theater, they will sometimes write out next to each line, what the specific intention is there to intimidate, to seduce. They'll write out next to every line to sort of remind themselves how to play that moment and what way they're going to try to attempt to get their objective. So don't worry if your dialogue isn't really perfect on the first time. You can use placeholders and summaries and other stand-ins if you aren't sure of that perfect phrasing on the first draft. Really, the best way to get good at this is just to read lots and lots of scripts. Okay, I'm not going to do the exercises just yet. I want to finish with a couple more slides first. Looks like we might have a question from Heated123. Go ahead.
Hey, what's up, Conor?
Hey, Heated. Do you have a question or comment for us?
Just a question. I have a couple, if that's okay.
Sure, go
I
ahead.
don't take up too much time. But and how important do you find jargon in dialogue?
So it's pretty important in world building, because sort of the words that the characters use tells us what their specialties are, what's normal to them, and what world they're sort of immersed in, right? Because characters that are in the same workplace or the same field or the same industry aren't going to spend a lot of time spelling things out or explaining things to each other that they already know. So when you have characters in professional settings, or characters in different industries, or characters that are doing just, the complicated jobs that we like to watch protagonists do, then jargon is actually a really useful tool for us kind of being immersed in their world and sort of learning the vocabulary of their trade.
Yeah, doing your research, right?
Yeah, you got to do some research and make sure to use the specific terms that people use. Try to use the specific, specific tools they would use, rules that they follow, regulations in different fields and industries, because a lot of the time we're writing about people in jobs that we ourselves have never really done.
Yeah, so the moment, instead of saying like, oh, I need like 4 cc's pumped into this guy, instead of like, just inject them, it automatically just takes you out of the story. You can't skip it. You can't get away with the jargon.
Right, yeah, medical stuff we've seen a million bad medical dramas over the years, so you really have to kind of, figure out specifically how realistic you're going to be And because in a superhero cartoon, it's a little less important that you be realistic about medical jargon than in a show that is entirely based in hospitals. So if you want to really immerse the audience in that world, then I think jargon is a really important tool. Learn the sort of slang that those characters would use and the specific terminology for all their different things in their field.
All right, cool. I knew it was important, but I was hoping I was hoping you'd say like, nah, you don't have to.
No, it is. Sorry. It's
No, all right.
it's
Cool,
great
cool.
it's great to use it, and not just workplace stuff, but also like local slang, regional dialects. In different age groups, people use different words, different cliques. Nerds and jocks. I know these are sort of like old-fashioned cliques, but people in all these different cliques have just different frames of reference, different sort of pop culture that they're familiar with. All that kind of stuff tells us a lot about the people.
Got it. All right. My next question would be a formatting question on dialogue.
Okay.
In the sense of using multiple languages, right? When to show the actual language, maybe put it in italics, maybe put it in English, but with the parentheses of like German or whatever,
Mhm.
right? Or maybe even put it as a note before a scene, saying this will all take place in like Chinese,
Yeah.
and then just
So sorry to cut you off, but yeah, there's a couple different ways to do it. Everything you've suggested, those are all valid ways that it has been done before. You can. It really just kind of depends how many different languages are being spoken through the script. If it's only one main other language, let's say your story follows some Americans who are on vacation in, I don't know, Turkey, then you might at the beginning of the story just give us a note, exactly like you just said, that says all italicized dialogue is in Turkish. You might do that, or you might say all dialogue in brackets or parentheses, or sometimes in rare instances I've seen other colors, but I don't really recommend using other colors for the most part. But yeah, you can totally mark it however you want. You can set that rule and say all this dialogue is like this, but then you have to be really consistent about that throughout the story. Don't later change it so that this dialogue this time in this italics, this is not actually Turkish. This is Romanian, so don't change the rule. Then we also, if we're changing languages frequently throughout the story, then it might make sense to each time you add a different language, if you have like 3 main ones or something, say, just spell out what the rule is. Or you might write this next scene takes place entirely in Romanian or something like that. That works too. All of those work. You just have to kind of pick the one that is the least obtrusive for your script.
So what do you think about writing it in its actual language, or is that just? I guess if the dialogue is important, right? Maybe?
Very rarely would you do that. You would really only kind of do that if it's not intended to be subtitled. So your point of view characters are not intended to understand the dialogue. And even in that case, you don't have to do that. You could always just put, like, they speak in Romanian. You don't have to spell out exactly what they say. But in any case, yeah, almost always you're going to put the... Like, if it's subtitled or something like that, you don't need to write out the original language. You don't need to Google Translate or anything like that.
Got it. Any rules on, they always say don't write more than 2 lines of dialogue, right? I think that's the rule.
More
But
than
I
two
guess,
lines
I
of-
guess
what-
after that it becomes...
More than 2
I
lines.
guess
What do you
when
mean?
you're writing dialogue, like just 2 lines of dialogue, pretty much don't write monologues for characters. But
Do you mean,
sometimes
like,
I feel like...
2 sentences, or what? What would 2 lines
I
be?
guess just 2 lines, like just 2 lines in the dialogue. You know what I mean? Or 2 sentences. I don't know. That's the rule I heard.
Okay, I haven't heard
But-
this, so I'm not sure what guideline you're referring to. I don't think there's a problem with having a character speak more than 2 sentences sometimes if they need. And then, yeah, I guess if it starts to become a monologue, there's not really like a strict definition of what a monologue is, but usually it's going to be the character talks a lot. So it's going to look like a big old block of text. There's not, like, if they're well written, then monologues are fine. And you should just kind of know the effect of using them, that they slow down the moment, that, it really implies that your camera is really focusing on this one person. It might sort of bring the energy down a little bit, depending on the intensity of that conversation, or that, not conversation, but the intensity of the monologue. You should just kind of know what it's doing. You can write monologues, though, if you want. There's no problem with that. That works.
And just to finish up with 2 questions, I know I'm taking up a lot of time, but
That's okay.
Just what are your thoughts on, I guess, having action between dialogue? Because sometimes I like the idea, but sometimes I feel it could maybe break up the pacing and maybe it takes away a lot of white space. But um,
It's a really great
I don't,
technique, I find, generally. Sorry, do you have more on that question that you wanted to keep going?
well, yeah, no, it was just, I guess, just the idea of like someone's talking, but then they're like carving up a sheep, or they're carving up something, I don't know, wood, but they're speaking, they're talking the whole time,
Hmm.
but you're putting those one line of actions between the dialogue
It's a
instead
great
of
idea.
maybe
Yeah,
just, yeah,
for sure. If every single line it's like line of dialogue, then a line of action, then a line of dialogue, then a line of action, that can get a little repetitive, and it might sort of imply that we're doing everything like this, like we're sort of just wading really slowly through the scene. Um, but as long as you don't overdo it, then yeah, you can definitely break up dialogue with action that tells us not only what your characters are physically doing in that space, but also keep in mind their emotional state, their tactics that they're using, and everything going on sort of internally as well that we can't really explicitly say, but we can hint at, and we can sort of describe the way that the characters approach the dialogue or the way that they sort of are acting in the scene. Yeah, you can absolutely intersperse dialogue with action.
got it. All right, cool. Just I thought it would get messy or muddled after a point, but I guess you do got to follow the pace.
Yeah, if you do it
And just I
well, it's
guess,
fine. Go ahead.
oh no, I guess I am the comment, which I guess can be used differently, right? I guess it depends on the situation, but the idea of someone walking in and being like, "Hey, how are you? I'm good. Oh, that's awesome." But I feel one line of I don't know where I read this, but I thought it was pretty cool, is that the word "yeah" could be just "yeah" can be heavy, right? Like someone walks into the room and goes like, "Hey, so how are you? I'm good." That's cool, and you can feel like the heaviness
Hmm.
from just that simple type of dialogue. But
Right.
in, I guess in another script, it would sound like this is boring. What's happening?
Yeah, it really just depends on what's going on in that moment. It's not that you can never say those words like "hi, how are you" and these things like that. It's just that if there's not something dramatically interesting going on, then there's usually no reason to include that part of the conversation. But if that part of the conversation is really interesting, then of course you should include it.
Gotcha. Cool. Cool. And just one last one. What do you think about characters talking to themselves? Is that always a no-no, or
Characters talking to themselves. That's a good question. This is kind of weird because in real life, people do talk to themselves. Even me, I talk to myself all the time, and it's helpful for like clarifying your thought process sometimes, and maybe like sometimes people even practice out conversations before they have them or things like that. But in movies and TV shows, it can feel sort of cheaty. It can feel like you're cheating a little bit sometimes to do it, unless you have a character that like that's explicitly sort of their thing, like they're always doing that. Then people in in well written movies and shows talk to themselves less than people in real life. It's one of those weird things that it's just like, even though it's realistic, it feels wrong when there's too much of it. So you have to be careful with it. You'd see it a lot in like old Disney cartoons and stuff like that because those sort of had a bit more of a stage play kind of vibe to them in some ways. Like the old Alice in Wonderland cartoon, Alice will be like, "I wonder which door I should go through." You know, she'll like sort of narrate what she's thinking out loud. But that nowadays, when you do that too much, it sort of feels like you are they're just speaking for the benefit of the audience. So you can definitely still do it, but be very sparing and very careful with how much you do that. And maybe consider that your character, they don't always have to just explicitly voice their exact thoughts out loud. Like maybe their way, we have a character that is thinking very much about, their upcoming wedding day, but they're not going to say, "I'm so nervous about my upcoming wedding day." They might just sit there and be like, "Shit." You know what I mean? So you can do it well.
Yeah,
You can pull it off well. You can have characters that talk to themselves, but be careful with it and try not to lean too heavily on it for exposition.
got it. All right, cool. All right, yeah, that's I think that's all I got for right now. But thanks, Connor. Appreciate the class.
Sure. Thanks for the questions. Okay. Where were we on this one? So there's a couple different types of speech, even different types of speech on screen. There our sort of primary type of dialogue, the first thing that most people think of is just verbatim. This means literally what was said. This is not even being really written at all. This is just being transcribed. It's a series of spoken words recorded into text that captured exactly the way that the person said it, but it really rarely serves a story too well because it's so unedited and so improvised. Obviously, if you're making a documentary, you're dealing primarily with verbatim text and organizing these clips. Even people speaking in interviews, this is also verbatim text, unless they have somehow prepared that speech beforehand or something like that. But regardless of that, we are trying to, if you're writing a story based on a true story or something like that, you may be working with verbatim dialogue. Or if you're writing something based on a court case, sometimes you can access the literal exact transcripts of every single thing that those people really said. But that really is going to just draw to your attention how much stuff is not helpful for your story. And looking at, for instance, a court transcript, you'll see how much stuff is just people confirming things they already know, people asking people to repeat themselves, and all this just kind of very non-dramatic stuff that you see what exactly happens when you try to just write it as it is. It can be difficult to format and read or recreate that kind of speech. And it's often marred by these imprecise words or misspeakings or people forgetting stuff or getting interrupted or talking over each other, which is a really big problem in transcripts sometimes. So verbatim speech is useful to study. You can find this on YouTube videos or court documents or transcripts of people speaking, if we're transcribing every word. Hidden camera programs, you can watch people speaking, extemporaneously, not knowing they're on camera. And this kind of dialogue can also just convey an otherwise difficult to find sense of jargon, mannerism, or the reality of people's lives. Diablo Cody, in writing her movie called Young Adult, said that she talked about hanging out at mall food courts to hear the slang that teenagers use, and this is something that her characters the main character in Young Adult actually does as well. So verbatim dialogue, interesting, and some people can speak extemporaneously really well, but almost never is this going to fit exactly into a story, except for lines here and there. So even in writing about real people and real events, you may find that you can use these things as tools, but you shouldn't rely entirely on them. You're always going to have to sort of fill in the gaps. Now let's look at prose dialogue, which is written in books, but is very different from this kind of screenwriting dialogue, because primarily there's two main types of prose dialogue. There's the external kind, when a character is talking to another person in the story, and we put it in quotation marks. Then we have internal dialogue, when a character is talking to themselves or thinking something, or in some cases, if the narration style is sort of the character actually speaking to the reader, then maybe we could consider that dialogue in a sense too. Prose dialogue is often interspersed with characters' reactions or reflections upon the spoken words, or the concepts that they are speaking about, in a way that movies and TV shows just can't do. We aren't entirely in these people's heads in the same way that we are in a book. And prose dialogue, therefore, is much more focused on the internal state of the character than plays or movies, or like you don't have to sort of reveal as much about them, because we're in their heads all the time. Your character may not need to, like, we may be able to get all the exposition that we need from simply their thought patterns or processes. So you can get away with not very much dialogue at all in books, whereas in a play, for instance, you have to have wall-to-wall dialogue or else there's really no play. So we're mostly kind of interspersing these lines with the characters' reactions and thoughts and their emotions that you were just not able to do in a script. That's the stuff that the actor carries. But when you're a book, you're kind of every member of the orchestra. You are the actor, you are the director, and you have to make sure that we're getting that sense of how people are saying these things and how people are feeling. And how characters are feeling and being able to tell the audience how the characters are feeling is the main difference in conversations in books from other media. I'm losing my voice a little bit, I think. So let's look at this just for a minute. I'm not going to read out the whole scene, but this is just a scene from a play, so you can see what wall-to-wall play dialogue looks like. And writing in plays sort of allows you to do a bit more of this sort of misspeaking, talking over each other, interrupting each other, going off track. Kind of it can mimic real-life speech a little bit more than movies and shows, just because, like, conversations don't have to be as concise and sharply edited in a play. conversations can kind of really go on in plays, and you can let the characters talk basically as long as you want. There are some plays that are just two characters in a room talking for an hour nonstop, and in that case, we might think of the scenes as more like topics of that conversation. Or you might think of, I guess I should say the other way around, the topics of the conversation are the scenes. So plays are about people talking. There are, dance performances and things like this as well, which are you would still call plays, but plays, as we think of them, for the most part, are about characters in rooms talking. And they can be doing interesting stuff in those rooms, but they have to talk all the time, or else the actors don't have too much to do. And so you can see just the specificity of the wording in this Martin McDonagh play here, and how the characters sort of repeat themselves or restate the same point or ask the other person to reiterate that or explain themselves. It sort of is much more precise than a lot of movie and TV dialogue, because in a play you can also you can imagine that this is the definitive text for this work, as opposed to a movie or show where this is kind of just the script is like the blueprint for the work, and the director might change it, and the actors might change it, and the editing process might change it. But in a play, this is the text, and this is always intended to be written this way. So you should be really sure if you're adding things like these beats, these people misspeaking or misremembering things or stuff like that, and you should just be really sure that you want the actor to do that every single time. It's really integral to how that character is intended to be conveyed to the audience. So theatrical dialogue, it's the main dramatic engine of plays, and it does have more of that semblance of everyday conversation than movie or show dialogue does, but it is still, regardless, very engineered, purposeful, and structural. It's often extremely written, very precise, specific, and stylized, or really naturalistic, in which we're imitating the patterns of verbatim dialogue a bit more, so you have more room to do that in plays. And because plays are just more talking. There is substantially more dialogue in play scripts than in movie scripts. And so you can kind of play around more in the conversations. You can kind of take us off track and then dance back to the point. You can have the characters just talk for longer in plays. Movie dialogue has to get to the point a little quicker. Our scenes are going to be like 2 to 3 pages long for the most part in movies. And this is, again, a highly constructed approximation of real life, in which each conversation is intended to move us through the story, convey character, and entertain. Ideally, everything from that list at once. So there's lots of different types of styles and syntax, and it's not really about communicating exactly how people talk. It's more how people want to talk or would prefer to talk. It's conversations with all the boring stuff cut away. So your movie dialogue has to fit into and convey information about and maintain consistency with the world, so I'm glad we got the question on jargon earlier. I'm going to finish the slide. Looks like we have a hand raised after that. I'll take the question afterwards. So we are trying to convey the sense of our world. Your character is a combination of the culture that you've chosen to portray, the dramatic quirks and genre styling that you're emulating. Characters just speak in different ways in different genres. In a noir movie, they're going to talk very differently than they would in a samurai movie, for instance. And just the simple quirks of the language you're writing. So you should just be, if you're writing in English, you should need to have a very strong command sense of English to write these conversations well. Not that every character will speak in a very sophisticated way. Some will definitely not, but that is something that is easier to capture if you have the strong command of the language. Believable dialogue doesn't always mean we believe that someone would say that in real life. It sort of just needs to make sense with the world and the characters that you have created and established. Okay, before I head to the next slide, we have a question, it looks like, from Taylor, and also a question from Joya. We'll start with Taylor.
Yeah, so just kind of going off of what Heated was talking about, specifically, just a random comment I had was when Heated was bringing up like really short, quick dialogue, that's really impactful. I was just thinking about the pilot of Ozark, where Marty is out doing something I can't remember, but he gets a call that the cartel guy is at the place, wanting to know where his money is, but Marty's saying no, I can't go, and he says he's here, and he just says all right, and that's like the only dialogue, and it just says a lot. But just made me think of that random comment. I wanted to know about you briefly touched upon it with young adult and getting accurate dialect with certain regions, ages, genders, so like social status. Do you have any recommendations for research on that?
Sure. So you're gonna want to start a little dictionary for each specific dialect that you're trying to emulate, and whether that is, a dictionary for these characters are Marines, so you're gonna have to watch some Marine documentaries about Army stuff. I know Marines are not Army; they would get mad for you saying that, but you get what I mean, right? So you have to, if it's gonna be a dictionary for that specific cultural world, that job, then you have to make one document for that, or one section of your world building document for that. Then if you have another one that's like, okay, these are kids in, let's say, an affluent neighborhood in Vermont, then maybe you're like, okay, maybe I need to sort of figure out exactly what the lexicon for those characters would be. And so I would just make a couple little dictionaries, listen to as many conversations as you can from those different groups, and just write out exactly what the phrases are and what they mean, like as if you're making a travel guide for going into that place. And so write out the rules, they say this to mean this. We're writing out what the new words are and their definitions and a couple examples of phrases that you've heard. Maybe you can throw a couple if you listen to some verbatim conversations, maybe you can throw a couple of those phrases in, just word for word, and use that. And also be looking at things like the sort of similes and metaphors that people use, like the comparisons that they make, and how hyperbolic they are, and just like the details of how they talk, not just specifically what the words are. And try to just make a little dictionary that you'll fill out with your best guess, and you can only do so much research, so don't worry about getting it absolutely perfect, but just do your best and try to make, like, I don't know, a page for, if you want to get a dialect really right, try to fill it out with about a page of notes.
Cool. And just one quick other question. I had this conversation a few weeks ago with somebody who wanted to know a good place to research how teenagers are currently talking today. And I said, TikTok is probably going to be the best place to just listen to how kids are speaking. But I started wondering, is there a big risk in instantly dating your script if you start using things like slang that is like present day slang?
It's not really a problem to have your script be dated, because everything, all art is a product of its time. Mm-hmm. And there's almost nothing that's going to, in 30 years, be absolutely timeless. Like, we're not going to look at something being made today and be like, wow, that could have been made now or 100 years ago. Like, almost nothing actually is like that. So I don't think it's a concern or a problem to have your script feel like it is set specifically in one era, unless you're trying intentionally to obfuscate the era or to feel like you are creating this kind of other world in some way. Or maybe you can take this kind of third approach where, like, this concern came up in the writing the movie Heathers, which is a great 80s dark comedy, and so as not to kind of do too much of that, to create this sense that this is like a little, specific little dollhouse world, the writer made up a bunch of slang, like just came up with a bunch of new slang that sort of feels in the spirit of like how teens might talk in a movie, but it's not really specific to any one region. It's not really actually from anything. So you can always do that too if there's some way that you can choose option C. You can like make up new slang if that's helpful for you. But overall, I wouldn't say this is a big concern. I think that it mostly is going to kind of hinge on if your movie's trying to talk about right now. Like if you're making a movie about kids growing up right now and the specific challenges that they face and the specific cultural implications and impact of that, then you probably would specifically want to use a lot of words that kids use today, specifically today. Whereas if your story is more about kind of universal themes, it's not about being a kid in 2023, it's just about, like, I don't know, adolescence in general or something like that, then it may not be as big a priority.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Sure, good questions. And I think we had a question from Joya. Okay, I've invited her to speak. Or I'll invite Meep if Joy is not able to speak at the moment. Go ahead, Meep.
Okay, so my question I think might have actually just gotten answered, but part of it was in relation to like when you write dialogue for characters who are speaking a different sort of dialect, is it better to just write a parenthetical stating that they're speaking with this accent, or to write the wording out literally, as in all of the broken parts of the slang that they would use? Because I have a character that I'm writing who has like a Boston accent, and I have an idea of what that sounds like, so I write their dialogue with all the cutoffs to make their words sound like they are from that part of the country.
Hmm.
But should I also maybe just dictate in a parenthetical or somewhere that like speaks with a heavy Boston accent or something like that?
So, good question. There are a couple ways to do this, but my general guideline for you is you need less of that than you think. A little goes a long way when it comes to um, what do we call it? Like the specific idiosyncrasies of a dialect. So a couple slang words here and there, a couple little words cut off or apostrophes added to the end or things like that will generally convey the sense of what the dialect is supposed to be, and the audience will fill in the rest in their mind. So I wouldn't try to really, really exhaustively include every single little tick of that specific accent.
Yeah.
Just here and just touches, just here and there, or else it's gonna really kind of it starts to grate on a reader and becomes frustrating to read sometimes. And you can also, yeah, you can just write he speaks in a heavy Boston accent. You can tell us that in the the first time the character speaks, or the first time they show up. That also works fine.
Okay, yeah, because like the exact, and it's more so the exaggerations of her speech. She's a very like larger than life character, and it was just like that accent kind of brings it all together. And I'm just like, do I need to literally convey that by writing all of the broken cutoffs of her words, like how she would say certain things, or would I just do the parenthetical to make that statement?
Mostly the parenthetical and just touches of words here and there.
And would I need to do it every time, or would I just need to put it down for like the opening instance to say speaks with a heavy Boston accent? Then for the rest of the script, you just know that.
We would just know that, but you can also still be throwing in slang occasionally or things like that. It's going to help maybe remind us that character is talking in that way, but we probably won't forget.
Okay.
Sure. Thanks for the questions. All right. So, I have a question. Can I put up the slide 2 before this one? Why don't I just link the slides so you guys can browse them as you like? And then I think we're going to watch a video. Let's watch in our YouTube activity thing on here on Discord. We're going to watch some scenes from Succession. And maybe talk about how these lines propel the story forward, reveal character, showcase characters' objective skills, personality, develop relationships, build and explore conflict, sound distinct from each other, fit into the context and style of the world, and just entertain us with witty, funny, interesting, and quotable lines. Okay, so I'm going to move our... I think we will have to... if you're watching on one of our other platforms that's not Discord, then you might have to join us on Discord to watch along, or you can just watch these scenes on your own time. Where did I put the slide? Let's see what we're doing here. 1 second. I can't find the slide I was looking for. That's okay. So I'm just going to leave it on the good dialogue slide. Here we go. And in our Discord, you can join our activity. How do I do this? Wait, can we do activities in stage channels, Nacho?
No. I
No.
think the activities are not in stage channels yet. Are they? No, I don't see a way.
Okay. What's the best way to watch a YouTube video, do you think?
Maybe you can just play it in a browser window, but let's see, mute
but
the
mute it
audio.
on.
Or if it's easier, I could.
Sure.
I don't know if I could play it if you want me to. I don't know if that's easier.
Yeah, maybe
I think
that
there was
works.
an issue with the audio, right?
Well, yeah, if you maybe you can stream it and people can just watch and hear it on your screen.
Okay.
And then should I mute the stream or no?
Or maybe just mute me. I guess I don't know if that does it. Or
I mute you.
then,
Okay.
then the stream can hear you talk, right? So you might want to like explain something or whatever.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean. Sure. So I'll just link it in the chat. Nacho can grab it, and then we can watch it together off his shared screen. We're going to watch a scene from Season 3, Episode 1 of Succession. And there's a lot of characters here and a lot going on, so I may not be able to give, because it's been a while since I've seen the episode, I may not be able to give entirely full context here, but they are trying to decide what to do as a result of a big kind of class action lawsuit against them. Okay, so just try to, you don't have to follow everything. There's a lot going on, so there's not going to be a quiz or anything, but just be thinking of how do these lines reveal character? How do they feel distinct from each other? What tactics are they using to approach their goals? And we can watch the words and also the video, because there's both in one in this little clip that we have here. Okay, so I'm just going to leave it on this slide. Let's direct our attention to Nacho's stream instead. Or do I have to stop mine before you can stream yours?
It looks like it. It's not letting me share. I'm. Maybe that's just a quirk of the stage jump, I guess.
Okay, I'll try it on my screen. Let me just change the window I'm streaming. Sorry, guys.
It might just be that you actually have to stop streaming, Conor, and that maybe only one person can stream at a time.
That could be.
Yeah.
Let's just try it like this.
I think it should work on Conor's thing.
Okay. Can you guys hear this?
Action stations. I gave him a chance. Jerry!
I can't hear it.
You can't hear it?
Oh, I can't.
Oh, I was able to hear it.
Actually,
fine. Yeah.
sorry, I forgot I muted it. It might be me.
Okay. Action stations. I gave him a chance. Jerry!
Can you hear that?
Yep.
Yeah, we hear it.
You can. Okay, let's take a watch. So we're going to be watching Logan Roy. He's the CEO of this corporation that is trying to decide their legal strategy moving forward. And should I mute the stream, Nacho?
Yes.
Yes. Okay,
so
I'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
So stream people come back in like 5 to 10 minutes. that we're going to watch after this. I'll have to mute it again for that. Thank you. All right, so we're back, and we just watched Logan Roy preparing to, as Roman puts it, cut his own son into a million pieces and throw him into the Hudson. So even if you don't know exactly what was going on in that sequence there, and weren't able to piece together like what exactly changed or occurred towards the end, we could at least see how, just in terms of the wording of these lines, how specific this show is. And how much personality we get from each character and just the way that they say things. What is it that Logan says as when they ask if they should order food? Or when Frank asks if they should order food? Well, what is he essentially saying? He's essentially saying, well, no, we shouldn't. And you could write just that. The line could just be no. But how does he say it? We're on saliva now. Like, he's so used to this idea of, like, he grew up poor, so he's always kind of like... getting mad at people for leaving the air conditioning on. He's a billionaire, but he's like, who left the air conditioning on? He's always like, you know, he comes from this hard life and hard background, so he's like, nope, we're on saliva now. Meaning he's used to going without food, and he expects everyone else to do the same. In any case, what do you guys notice about how do these lines reveal character, showcase objective skills, personality, and tactics? I think we saw a lot of different tactics around the table and a lot of different types of approach towards these characters getting what they want. Feel free to speak up. Who has a comment or question? Heated, go ahead.
Yeah, something... I love the dialogue of Succession, even though it takes me multiple watches to understand what they're saying. But I guess that's the rewatchability of it. But something that I appreciate and that always reminds me is that even though Logan Roy is the top dog, he is the one asking the questions, you know. And I feel like in dialogue that's really important, is asking questions, because you're always going to keep the dialogue moving. And
yeah,
that's what I...
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's it. Just pretty much for that. And towards the end, you said there's a lot of tones and a lot of different plays going on, but then it just breaks.
Yeah.
With just asking a question about a sandwich, and then it breaks the seriousness, and then we're off. And yeah, that's what I got.
Thank you for those comments. Yeah, we like to try to get in late and get out early. Out early meaning we want to end the scene as soon as dramatically makes sense to do. Like, as soon as we hit a stopping point, we leap. We don't linger and keep talking and keep debating. And, like, once the scene's over, it's over. We move on. Thank you for these questions and comments, or these observations. And he did comment on questions was important, because I think a lot of what you're doing in dialogue, especially on this show, is we're talking about power dynamics and how dialogue can really define power dynamics. We can learn a lot about a scene, who has the power in a scene, by asking who's asking the questions and who's answering them. Carmen, go ahead.
Okay, so I guess there is the possibility of a Department of Justice investigation, improprieties having to do with something. I wasn't totally tuned into it.
I can summarize it for you if you want. Basically, they're being sued for a history of covering up sexual assaults and misconduct in their company. And so the son of this billionaire is the one who's heading this faction that's trying to take down the company by using that as their leverage.
Okay, so yeah, the class action lawsuit. Okay, so that's the background that I didn't have, but it is alluded to, like when he says, do I pull down my panties, you know, kind of thing. I feel like this is way overdone. I mean, I do enjoy all of these, like, you know, the euphemisms. Well, there's a lot less euphemism, but a lot of metaphor, you know, but everyone at that table talks like that, and that just doesn't ring true to me. I feel like maybe if there were, like, less people using these metaphors, you know, it would be more realistic, but it's like they're just really driving it home. Every single person is So to me, that kind of shows. I mean, yeah, there were some distinctions. Like obviously, Roman is, he's like the strategizer, right? The shrewd strategizer, right? He's all about tactics. But at the same time, I almost felt like they were all the same character because they were all talking like this. So I feel like it was overdone, but it was very interesting though.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I think that when characters are in their sort of business mode, they do tend to sort of use similar jargon. And I mean, this is a tight-knit group that has run this company for a long time. I mean, this is family members who run the company. A lot of them are family. So they're very used to how each other talk. Sometimes there are characters and scenes in this show that are complete outsiders. Greg, for instance, I think we all know, anyone who watches the show. Greg is always the odd man out and cannot keep up with what's going on in these scenes. So maybe just in this one context, it might sort of seem like that. I think watching the show, you realize all the different dimensions these characters have and sort of the really, really, really unique ways that each of them approach different scenes and different tactics. And it's some of the best dialogue on TV, for sure. Thank you, Carmen. Let's hear from Meep.
So there, sorry, I didn't actually have my headphones on. So there was something that I kind of that you had kind of pointed out that I sort of thought about as you were speaking to. I believe it was heated, and you were also making note of like power dynamics. I think like personality is like an important thing you want to have to think about when you're writing your characters, right? So that they don't, so that they're because I know there's a way to write like, there's a way to write good dialogue, but then there's also a way to write like a good character. So like you have to be thinking not just, oh, this would sound good, but more so this is also how the character would talk, because you ultimately, while you want to write good dialogue, you don't want to come off as generic. So like I guess what are good ways to like avoid that? Because you can write good generic dialogue, I'm sure, but if someone who's savvy enough could pick up on that while they're reading, it could kind of ruin your whole story, because then they're like, oh, this is just basic.
Sure, so you can write out a more generic version of the scene to begin with. Like, a lot of the time, your first pass at the dialogue, it can just convey the bare information if you need it to, if you're not able to instantly think of exactly how each character would say stuff. And then when you go back in your second draft, I'd recommend asking how would just that character say that. Like that scene at the end, or that moment at the end where Carl asks, should we order food? And Logan could just be like, nope, we're good. But what did he say? Nope, we're on saliva now. So you can kind of maybe go through and ask, if a line feels really basic and like anyone could have said this, then and it's okay to have that now and then. So everybody says yes and no and stuff like that, but there are going to be moments where you can have that character's personality shine through. And if it feels like a moment kind of needs that, then maybe try out a couple different versions of it. Think like maybe just write out 3 different ways that your character might say that, and try to pick the one that's the most amusing and the one that sort of gets to the point the quickest. Yeah,
because part of one of the things that I'm writing, and I kind of just noticed it as I was working on it, was it's kind of a superhero story, and I'm just like, a lot of superheroes tend to have the same sort of pacing with their dialogue, and it's like, while this gets the point across, is this enough to make the character come off as unique? And I guess it's just like, what are the things we should consider outside of how good the dialogue sounds when writing dialogue for characters in our stories?
Sure, great question. So some things you can use to distinguish these characters and make sure they each feel fleshed out and real. I would look a lot at how direct they are versus how much they work through things like implication and suggesting what they want. Some characters are just going to be right to... I mean, if we're looking at... Let's just look at the X-Men, for instance. If Sabretooth wants something, he's just going to be like, point at it, walks over, takes it, right? Whereas if it's a tricky character that I don't know, we have Gambit or someone like that, then they're maybe going to approach that thing very differently. They're not always going to say what they want. They're going to suggest and imply and seduce and just kind of use different tactics. So I think different tactics just bring out different sides of characters in interesting ways, and that can be one of the main things you use to kind of distinguish them. How much do they say what they mean versus how much are they doing other stuff, like implying what they want? So that's one big thing to look at. Otherwise, you can always add the sort of limp in the eye patch, which are going to be things like a lisp, or your character has an accent or a dialect, or your character is a sailor that always uses sailor metaphors. There's this great character in House of the Dragon, this guy named Corlys, who, whenever he's kind of in his courtly wisdom mode, his nation's thing is that they're expert sailors, so he's always giving advice through that context. So frame of reference is also just a really other good way to distinguish characters too. Think like, if that character has to make a comparison, what are they going to pick, right? Are they going to pick a Shakespearean sonnet to reference? Or are they going to pick an episode of Naruto to reference? Look at their frame of reference and the sort of things that they're drawing from. That can be another nice way to distinguish them. And last, maybe just think of how emotional are they? Like, how much are they going to be allowing emotion to come through, or maybe leaning on emotion to get what they want, versus how much are they going to stay reserved and cold and more calculating?
Okay. Yeah, those are definitely things to kind of consider. Because I like, that was something I just thought about. It's like, I don't want my characters to sound like, I don't want somebody to look at this and be like, oh yeah, I'm just like every other, generic like Marvel hero that you would hear talking nowadays with the way that they say things. Mm-hmm. How can you make this character, especially a superhero who are like supposed to be known for having character, feel distinct? I guess was kind of what I was trying to do. So I'll take those things into consideration, because I have quite a few instances of that where I just wanted to figure out how I could get past that better, and I think you've given me a lot to think about.
Sure, I hope that helps. Yeah, think like, I mean, if we're looking at just the basics, Spider-Man, his approach is, his tone and his tactic is always going to be levity, right? He's a jokester. He's always coming up with little puns and little taunts to keep the opponents off guard, making up nicknames for them. So his tactic is a big part of what sets him apart. You may not think of it as a tactic, but it is. It's, I'm going to keep things light. That's like how Spider-Man approaches situations, and it shows through in his dialogue. As opposed to like a brooding hero like Batman, who has the opposite approach, right? Batman doesn't talk at all except in guttural grumbles, and if he's going to say,
it's very like straightforward, or like kind of insightful with whatever it is that he's saying to whomever he's going after.
Yeah, if he's talking to somebody, it's going to be because he's just telling them exactly what he wants, probably. He's like, where's the bomb, right? But if he's on his own, he's going to be monologuing about the darkness inside his tortured soul and things like that, which Spider-Man would never do. So I think it comes through in their emotional tactics really well. Go ahead.
And I think the funny thing is that when you have the instances where he actually breaks that mold, it tends to say something about the character that he's like, oh man, if Batman's doing this, then that means something's really going down, because he never does that.
Yeah, that's a great point. So the moment that Spider-Man gets serious, we know that stuff has gotten really bad, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
Same sort of thing. So yeah, setting those rules and then finding ways to break up to build up to breaking that rule can be a great way to show that a character's changing.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Good questions. All right, I think we have one more scene to watch. Let me see, which one do we want to do? I have another one that has the script to screen kind of annotations on it, which are, do you guys like that? I find that that's helpful to follow. I do have a scene that's just crazier and a bit more dramatic. Do I want to do toy soldiers or boar on the floor? Let's do another one with the script on the page too. Oh, maybe we have a question from Dan first.
Quick question, if I may. I noticed that the script was just dialogue. There was no action lines breaking up the dialogue. Or was that just with the read-along going on?
I'm not sure if
it broke that cardinal sin rule of having people sitting around and doing nothing but talking.
So TV has a lot more of that than screenplays do, especially episodes that are from much further down the line. This is from season 3 of the show. Oh. So the scripts are going to be in that shorthand that writing team has developed with their actors. TV scripts are also going to use things like inside jokes to the other writers sometimes, or they're going to, all the scripts for Lost had a very specific voice to them. They had tons of F-bombs in the descriptions and stuff like that. So shows do over time kind of develop their own shorthand, and like the style of writing will change over the run of the script, but the pilot is going to be the sort of example that we look at for make sure we don't lose track of character motivation in these long dialogue scenes. It's more acceptable, I guess I would say, for episodes from much longer in that show's run to have huge blocks of just dialogue, because those actors have worked with each other so long, those directors have directed so many episodes that we know who the characters are really well.
Oh.
So do you see how when we're just meeting those characters and trying to get into that world, it's more important to sort of highlight the specifics of their motivation and tactic changes in scenes and stuff like that. And in the next scene we're about to watch, it's actually a great example. You should pay really careful attention to the way that the writer uses those action lines to kind of clarify how the character's emotional states are changing. But does that make sense just in the basic explanation?
Yep.
All right. Great. Thank you so much for the question. Okay, let's do one more scene. So I'm going to turn our stream volume down again.
so that I can go deeper into those characters and not have to do this kind of juggling act, you know.
Yeah. This is a big ensemble show. There's a ton of characters, so it's
Mm.
if you have fewer characters, it's sometimes easier to practice getting, like, if you're just improving your skills, starting on scripts that have fewer characters, because they allow you to drill a little deeper into those characters' reactions, emotions, and experiences. So that's probably a good idea.
Yeah, what's this called?
Succession.
Succession? Is it on Netflix?
It's on HBO.
Oh, HBO. Okay, thanks.
Sure. Thanks for the comments, Carmen. Let's hear from Meep. And I left it on this action line because this is just one of the more interesting ones.
Honestly, this was more of a technical observation. I didn't know we could write action lines that conveyed, like, some of the I don't know, maybe this is a foolish thing to say, but I always thought that, like, when we were writing action lines, we weren't meant to be too heavy with displaying too much of the, like, emotion that's, like, I guess, on display. It kind of feels like this is, like, a very expressive sort of, like, visual. So I was just like, oh, okay, so we can kind of do that.
Yeah, if we can see it, if the actor can play it, you can write it in as much explicit detail as you want. What you want to avoid doing is telling us things that we can't see, the stuff that's only in the character's head, that there'd be no way for us to tell by watching. But do you see how, what's this line say? Shiv sees the squeeze and things fall into place quite horribly. Her face falls, she crumples emotionally. Kendall sees, he supports her. It's a little abstract and it's a little in the characters' heads, but we can see all of that, right? We can watch somebody crumple emotionally because that's telling the actor how to play it. Go ahead.
So don't put it in too much detail, but definitely put in, like, you know, enough to know that's what they're doing.
Yeah, we don't want to say, like, oh, she's thinking of her third grade birthday party, that we have no way of knowing that, but we can see somebody crumble emotionally, for sure.
Right. And also, I know I've asked this question probably before, but regardless of the medium, be it animation or live action, that it would still be the same. There's no extra level of detail that's necessary, just enough to be visually understood, regardless of whether it's people acting or a drawing, right?
Sorry, can you ask that again?
So if it's so it doesn't matter if it's like a live action. It doesn't matter if the story is meant to be in live action or if it's meant to be animated. You should always adhere to the rule that you just mentioned, where if it can be seen, then write it out.
Oh, yeah, unless it's animated and we can, like, zoom into your character's brain and see something inside their head or something. Are you asking, are animated live action scripts written the same way?
No, I was always under the impression that scripts that contained animation required you to write far more detail because it needed to be as explicit as possible so that whoever was animating it knew what they were working with. But I figured that's...
So,
what?
In some cases, yeah, you have more room to kind of be more visual in animated scripts. Like, you can say exactly what things look like if you really want to. But given that most of our scripts aren't going to be made, it doesn't matter all that much. And, like, it's more important when you're writing pilot. Like, if that's an important consideration for when you're writing a show that's actually going to be drawn by people. But when you're just kind of writing pilots to try to break in or just to practice or things like that, you write an animated and a live action script pretty much exactly the same. But that is a good, important consideration, because when you're drawing it, when somebody has to actually draw it, they need to know specifically what to draw.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you for the questions and comments.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've seen some interesting examples of ways to write out not only the words themselves, but the things in between the words. Ways to show exactly watch the characters changing tactics or changing as things are affecting them. They should be processing and reacting to these things in between the lines. And our dialogue should be always kind of expressing and revealing that character, propelling the story forward, showcasing the character's objectives, skills, personality, and tactics, and developing these relationships in interesting and logical directions. So we're down to our last 15 minutes. I think I'm not probably going to do any exercises today. I think I might go right to some common dialogue issues. and let's jump into this. So a lot of writers really like writing dialogue, and they kind of let their characters loose to talk as much as they want.
I think maybe Conor might have gotten just disconnected.
Hello?
Possibly. Maybe an internet issue.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Oh, sorry. I'm not sure. Did I press a key to get off the stage or something? I'm not sure what happened there. The stream's still going, so sorry about that. All right, so we're on common dialogue issues. So a lot of writers just let their characters talk as much as they want because they're like, they have a lot to say. And on your first draft, that can kind of be okay just to learn exactly what those characters do have to say. But in your later drafts, then we like to kind of cut back on that a little bit. Let me share. Wait, hang on. Let me share our slideshow again. Here it is. Michelle says she can barely hear me. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, maybe you can turn up my volume, Michelle, by right-clicking on my name and using that blue bar to adjust the volume. All right, so you don't want to just have your characters talk and talk and talk. Knowing when they should shut up is kind of an important part of writing movies and TV. Every line of dialogue should be in there for a reason, and if not, then it can usually be cut. But this advice can be tricky because writers often will approach dialogue as the characters just talking. But in every scene, we should be remembering they have a goal. And in front of that goal is some kind of obstacle. And in order to try to overcome that obstacle, sometimes the tactic they're taking requires talking. So it can always be amping up the pressure in a scene or it can be amping up our engagement in a scene to put your characters under some kind of pressure. Having characters that speak lines that are hard to say or hard to hear, as you might say, or as you might describe it, means that we're always going to be ensuring that our conversations are dramatic. You shouldn't just have your characters talk on and on about nothing at all if there's no other ulterior point to it, like I talked about in the Pulp Fiction description of how that dialogue about nothing actually does build character and build tension and juxtapose what we see and kind of do those interesting things. Usually we're not just having them talk about stuff or shoot the breeze in a friendly manner with no purpose or no conflict. We can kind of lose engagement in that story. It's okay to have your characters begin scenes by talking in this relaxed and friendly manner or order food or have small talk or things like that, but if we just keep up with that for the entire scene, that can just feel like your character's messing around rather than pushing the story forward. Let's talk more about objectives and tactics. Looks like we have maybe a question from Carmen first. Go ahead.
Okay, I do want to address the issue what Dan was saying because he's right. I mean, there are things being described in a way that, if we did it, then it wouldn't be, maybe acceptable because it's something that's unfilmable or, but when you're talking about like a room full of like established writers, right? Mm-hmm. They can basically do what they want. Is that what it is?
Yeah, 100% that. And
okay.
Also, you can do what you want if you do it well. That's the main difference, is that a room of established writers is probably going to do that thing well, or are more likely to do that thing well. So, like, these rules are not like handcuffs that are placed on you. These are general guidelines, like saying you shouldn't swerve your car on the road usually, right? What if there's a deer in the way? Well, then in that case, you should swerve the car, right? But you have to do so skillfully so as to not crash. So that's like all of these guidelines and these things. I know it can sound restrictive when you're starting out because you're like, well, it seems like there's so many kind of like rails in place. But you can, once you are skillful enough to jump over the rails, you can write however you want, for sure.
Okay, so I'm glad we cleared that up. Okay, then the other thing is, like, I would never say crumbles emotionally. Like, I would never use the word emotionally in my script, right? Okay. So, I've said she falls to her knees and screams as loud as she can, like showing the actual action of crumbling emotionally. You know what I mean? So, that's kind of like an example of what Dan is saying as well, right? Crumbles emotionally. That doesn't really say what's happening with the character. It just kind of provides, like a guideline for the actor to say, okay, now at this point where it says that, you're going to crumble emotionally, whatever way you see you should, given the situation.
Right.
Like improvising, right? They have really good actors that
Yeah.
can do this, you know.
Hmm.
And maybe the situation doesn't call for falling to your knees and screaming as loud as you can, you know. When she
Yeah.
crumbles in that scene, she sits on the right, she sits on the
Hmm.
arm of the chair and she's looking down. It's like, you know, she's probably thinking about all that money she's going to lose now, you know, and that's her way of crumbling emotionally because the normal way of that character is probably very, very confident every day, right? For
Hmm.
the most part.
Yeah.
You wouldn't see this character looking like that in that moment, right? Unless something really
Right.
bad happened. Okay, so my other question is, I don't think I have like one I mean, I know that the F word is like huge in scripts, right? I cannot get any of my characters to say that word.
Okay. Is that a problem?
Okay. I mean, that's what I'm wondering. It's like, is that okay? Because like they're killing and being killed in like horrible ways, and even my kids are like, "Mom, your characters are like killing people in like terrible ways, yet they never say curse words." So like they think it's kind of weird, right?
It
I
might
actually,
stand out as weird. Yeah, in some cases it can. I mean, it can feel like you're watching Lost was sort of weird like this. I thought sometimes it's like network TV has this problem, right, where the characters will they're in a survival scenario, but no one's ever so upset that they say the F word, really, ever. It doesn't feel realistic. But then again, movies are inherently kind of unrealistic, so it's not a huge
yeah,
problem. If you really don't want to do it, you don't have to. But it might some readers might go, what's going on here? Are these people all Mormons, or what's the deal?
yeah. Well, I was thinking I could just maybe throw in one really bad curse word, you know, just to do it. But I feel because I mean, I feel there are some pretty horrible things going on in the script that I'm about to finish, but not one F word. So yeah, I'll think about that. Thank you.
Sure, yeah, hope that helps. And in reference to the just the comment on writing that a character crumbles emotionally, I think that and rather than spelling out explicitly what they do, I think in a show where you've had 3 seasons and it's at the end of the third season, that actor knows the character better than you do, almost. So sometimes you want to kind of get out of their way and just let them play that moment exactly as their character would. So you'll see that sometimes in later shooting scripts. I think it's mostly important in the pilot to be a little more explicit with character behavior. Taylor, go ahead.
Hey, I just wanted to get some advice on exposition dumping. And like when you have no other way like out of it, when you've gotta just get this exposition in there, with no real segue or opening to do so that's natural. And like what's the most effective way to expo dump?
To expo dump. So make something else interesting going on in the scene. Have you seen Terminator?
Yeah.
Think of all the scenes in Terminator where John Connor is explaining to Sarah Connor, I'm from the future. That guy's a robot. He's also from the future. I was sent here to stop him. And there's a lot of explaining to do.
Yeah.
But every time it happens, there's something else. There's some element of danger in the scene. Like we're in a car and I have to whisper the exposition to you now or else he's going to find us. Or we do one moment where Kyle is talking about, it's going to get her. It's never going to stop. It's a monster from the future as he's being dragged away by cops, right? So we have some other point of tension, conflict, or danger in the scene that makes the exposition feel less intrusive. Think of how you can have something else fascinating going on.
Yeah, so basically just distract people with something else.
Kinda. Yeah, kinda.
Cool.
You distract them in a way, but in like usually the best way to make a flat moment work is to try to do 2 things at once. Make sure your scene is not only developing a relationship, also following a character trying to accomplish a goal with a strong tactic and all this other stuff, but also there's a ticking clock. You know what I mean? Like the more you can be doing in that scene in the same moment, the more that you can be accomplishing in a single moment, the more the audience will sort of lean in.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Sure. Great question. Okay, so we're down to our last 5 minutes. I think maybe I've gone through enough slides, so I'll just open to questions or comments from anyone on dialogue stuff. And do we have a slide on upcoming classes? You know, I think this is our last free class, isn't it, Nacho? For this cycle. Oh, Nacho, are you there? Maybe his mic cut out. Okay, no problem. So let's open the floor to any questions and comments from anyone who'd like to ask about dialogue or comment on what we've talked about today. Nacho, do you hear me okay? Maybe not. That's all right. Okay. Feel free to raise a hand or type in the chat to comments. I see a few people are typing. I'm just going to leave this on our upcoming bootcamp slide. Hi, Nacho. Can you hear me? Oh, I heard him clear his throat. Are you there?
Yes. Yo.
Oh, hi. I think we had lost your mic for a little while. No problem. Let's see, does anybody else have a question or comment? Here's a question from Michelle. Will this be on YouTube so I can watch the entire thing? Yep, we're already on YouTube, so you can find this on our Script Camp page. Just search for Script Camp on YouTube. You should find us. Any other questions, comments, points of discussion before we wrap up for today? Meep, go ahead.
What do you do if a character is like explaining something and then like they sort of come up twice? Like, I noticed sometimes I would see people write continued, but do you do that if a character is basically speaking in between two breaks of action? Like, let's say they're saying something and then like there's like an important juncture where like they slam their fist into the ground or like they move or do something else, but then it's still them talking. Would you say like would you do the character, the action line, the character again, and then they repeat the dialogue?
Wait, repeat the dialogue. Why
Not repeat the dialogue, the character, the action line, the character, and then whatever else they were going to add or whatever else they were going to say.
So you're asking about the more and continued elements. So more and continued are part of the default format scheme in most screenwriting software. That said, they are kind of outdated, to me at least. I haven't used them in many, many years. I turn them both off every time.
I've heard the same too. Yeah.
You don't need to worry about it. I would turn them both off.
Okay. I think that was my only question that popped into my head at the moment.
Great. Hope that helps.
Mm-hmm.
Carmen says I've turned off continue lines. That's fine. Yep, everyone is free to do that. Michelle says I have a question about action, but I'll write you later. I'm kind of tired. I understand, Michelle. I'm kind of tired too. Feel free to ask in our upcoming boot camps or in lab on Saturday. All right, we're going to wrap up here for today. Thank you so much for coming, folks. Hope I was a little under the weather, so I hope this was an okay class. Hope that you all got some good stuff out of this and have seen some maybe new techniques to writing dialogue and the things in between the dialogue that really makes those scenes work so well. Thank you, guys. We will be back in class tomorrow, 6 to 8. We have our last novel class on Saturday, so the week 12 of 12. We're going to be finishing up those books on Saturday, and then on Sunday we will have our feature class 10 to 1. No, 10 to noon. 10 a.m. to noon. There we go. All right, thanks a lot, guys. Hope to see you soon in your next Script Camp class or event.